This meet
Good morning and good evening, everyone, wherever you are in this part of the world. My name is Riaz Baldev, and I welcome you to our second part of our web jam series between Whiteboard Labs, the UWI Open Campus, and Arni University. In this event, we will be discussing leadership in an Industry 4.0 world, influencing process of leaders. I would like to introduce Dr. Luz Longsworth, Dr. S.P. Singh, and I'd like to make introduction as well to the entire Whiteboard Labs team, Dr. Rohit Shipstone, and the interns as well from Whiteboard Labs. So now I would just like to make announcements. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter it into the chat room, into the chat box. Sorry. At the end of the presentation, we will ask you to unmute your mic, and you can ask a question, and we will build a nice conversation from there. So again, I would like to thank everyone for joining us from the Caribbean as well as India and wherever you are in the world. So at this time, I would like to introduce Dr. S.P. Singh. Dr. S.P. Singh served as the principal of St. John's College, Agra. He has been a resource person in various national and international conferences, worked as a research guide, and has published many papers in reputed journals. His vision is to facilitate the optimal growth of the learners and to promote their all round development. So I would like to introduce Dr. S.P. Singh, who would introduce our main presenter. Thank you, Dr. S.P. Singh.
A very good evening, and thank you all for being here today for the second web jam in the series, Unboxing 4.0. This web jam series is brought to you by Whiteboard Labs, Ernie University, and the University of West Indies. The objective of this series is to understand how Industry 4.0 will affect each one of us, not only as if we are data analysts or if we are IT engineers or any other individual working with 4.0 technology, but more importantly, how it is going to affect non-technology folks like people in human resource, in academics and research, in social sciences, in marketing, in sales, and so on. Today, we'll hear Dr. Luz Longsworth, the Pro Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies Open Campus. Let me take this opportunity to share a brief bit about Dr. Longsworth. Dr. Longsworth holds a doctorate in business administration in higher education management from the University of Bath in the United Kingdom. She holds a BA in French and Spanish and MBA degrees from the University of West Indies, and also holds a Master of Arts degree in Hispanic Studies from the Queen's University, Ontario, Canada. Dr. Longsworth has over 25 years of experience in both academia and business in Jamaica, the British Virgin Islands, Belize, and Barbados, and so has been long both seen had long exposure to both the sides, industry and academia. Dr. Longsworth's research focus is in the field of leadership development, change management, and organizational development and transformation. She is a certified trainer in leadership courses in 360-degree leadership, communication skills, accelerating teamwork, and 5 levels of leadership for the internationally renowned John Maxwell Company and in leadership embodiment. Dr. Longsworth will be anchored by Mr. Riaj Baldev, also from the University of West Indies. Mr. Riaj Baldev works as project coordinator for business development at the University of West Indies.
Okay, we seem to have lost Dr. S.P. Singh there.
Yeah, yeah.
So while unfortunately we will have to go directly to our presentation, but before we do that, I would like to make special welcome to Mr. Shiv Tuhan, who is the Vice Chancellor of Ani University. So welcome, Mr. Tuhan. All right. So with this, I would now hand over to Dr. Luz Longsworth, who would make our main presentation. Over to you, Dr. Longsworth.
Thank you very much, Riaz, and good morning to everyone. Special greetings to my colleagues from Whiteboard Labs, as well as from Arni University, Vice Chancellor Shiv Tohan, and many thanks to Professor Singh for his warm introduction. I am going to share my screen and begin because we have a tight 20 minutes. So I hope everyone is seeing the screen. It is my pleasure to participate in the second of the series, of the WebJam series on Industry 4.0. And I'm very happy that I followed upon my brilliant colleague, Dr. Shipstone, because he made my life a lot easier as we speak about leadership in an Industry 4.0 world. When we speak about the fourth industrial revolution, we tend to speak more in terms of the technologies, the changing processes. But one of the things that sometimes gets overlooked is what happens in the world of the people, what happens in the world of leadership. As we know, leadership is very important in achieving goals. And so what I want to do for the few minutes I have is to look at a sort of mapping of the development of leadership through the industrial cycles, and then to look at Industry 4.0, its peculiar characteristics, its rupture with many of our previous understandings of how leadership functions, and then to share some thoughts as to the kind of leadership that will make an organization successful in this Industry 4.0 world. So if we look at the evolution of industrial development, we can also map the evolution of leadership skills and leadership styles. So Industry 1.0, as we learned from Dr. Shipstone last week, really was a mechanical revolution. And in that revolution, in that environment, the type of leadership that was prevalent and that was successful could be summed up in three areas. What is called the great man, and yes, it was a man for the most part, not a woman, theory of leadership. And that tended to have more autocratic tendencies and authoritarian tendencies. And if you think about it, it worked for the mechanical revolution because the great man, the leader at that time, was the sole holder of the knowledge that helped to move that revolution forward. In Industry 2.0, which is the manufacturing and revolution, science, and particular mass production, what we found in Industry 2.0 is that leadership also started to evolve because it was a matter of an exchange now between the leader and the employee or the follower in order to achieve the objective. And remember, that is what leadership is all about, how you work towards achieving objectives. And in Industry 2.0, what we found prevalent in leadership was charismatic leadership. Again, a single individual really building enthusiasm, building support, building loyalty from the workforce towards the goal, towards achieving the goal. But that leadership still remained very directive, still very one man focused, and also very transactional. In other words, there was a leader, what is called a leader member exchange in the literature, where people received incentives for the achievement of their goals. So quickly moving to the digital revolution, which is Industry 3.0. And I think some people still don't know that we're already past that into Industry 4.0. We saw more changes towards the leader becoming less central in terms of the evolution, but also still very important in encouraging, in developing enthusiasm, but becoming more transformational. In other words, it wasn't all about the leader anymore. It isn't all about the leader anymore. It's about the team. And in the digital revolution, we also have virtual leadership, which is quite a rupture with what had happened in Industry 1.0 and 2.0, where your employees, your staff members, your organization was all co-located with your leader. Here we have the leader in one place and the organization all over. And other types of leadership that became very popular in this environment are distributed leadership. Clearly, if the leader is no longer next to the follower, then it is important that other people have leadership roles within the organization. And servant leadership, which in fact is becoming a lot more popular, where the leader is actually serving the organization and the community. And we'll see how that has transferred into Industry 4.0. So here we are in Industry 4.0, and the key thing in looking at what kind of leadership influences the objectives, the achievement of objectives, we have to look at what are the key characteristics of Industry 4.0. Last week, we had quite an extensive vision of what Industry 4.0 looks like. So now I want to hone in on what the organization of Industry 4.0 looks like as we speak. First of all, we know that Industry 4.0, and you see that in the center of the graphic, is really now looking at not just virtuality, not just technology, but that interface between the individual and technology, and leading towards innovation as well as the bottom line for organizations. But what we find now is that the 4.0 organization is multi-generational and diverse. This is the first time in history that organizations have 4 generations coexisting in the same organization. So the challenges then of motivation, of incentivizing people of different generations, baby boomers, people born between 1940 and 1965. Then you have the Generation X and the Generation Y and the millennials. And now we have the new generation, which we don't have a name for. Maybe they're the TikTok generation. But these are all the generations coexisting. So it is a challenge for a leader to be able to incentivize and motivate all of these persons. Diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity. And people know that I smile and say that the future of leadership is feminine, but I don't necessarily mean that it is only women, but certainly some of the qualities that people say are feminine qualities. It's virtual. Even if you have an organization that has employees right in front of you, there is a lot of virtual communication by emails, by Zoom, and so on. That's important. It's a mobile workforce. So your workforce may be moving from one organization to the other. It's agile. There is a focus, particularly in the newer generations, on health, wellness, and well-being. And in that regard, we know what's happening with the pandemic. But in organizations now, organizations are putting in place things like yoga classes. And someone last week, Dr. Shipstone, asked about yoga and Industry 4.0. Yoga classes, meditation classes, mindfulness classes, Tai Chi, karate. These are all things in order to ensure that the workforce maintains health and wellness and well-being, mind, body, and soul. This is new. This is not necessarily something that we saw in 1, 2, or 3. It's an innovative and collaborative environment, and that's a key thing. No longer is there so much competition, but one looks at networking and collaboration in order to maximize profit. And finally, the emphasis is on soft skills, and we have to find another word for it because these skills are no longer soft. These skills are very important skills. And in fact, when we look at the need for skills in the 4.0 organization, the hard skills are only about 28%. And the rest of the skills required are skills for communication, collaboration, innovation. So we know that the soft skills are becoming actually the hard skills. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are today's leaders still using the 20th century models, the models for sort of industry 1.0 to 3.0 for our 21st century challenges, industry 4.0? And I would say yes. I would say that definitely they are because, and I'm quoting this from Thomas Friedman from his book, Thank You for Being Late, The Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Acceleration, where he says there is a mismatch between the change in the pace of change and the ability of industries, of governments to develop learning systems, training systems, management systems that will enable the citizens of the world to really maximize the benefit of this new Industry 4.0. So the first point here is that we have to ensure that our employees are trained and understand how to maximize the benefits of this new environment. So what are the skills that we need for this complex environment? Ulbian et al. In 2010 put forward a theory of complexity, the complexity leadership theory. And you can see that what they're saying here is that leadership should not only be position and authority, but also an emergent interactive dynamic, a complex interplay from which collective impetus for action and change emerges when heterogeneous agents interact in networks in ways that produce new patterns of behavior and new modes of operating. And all that means is that it doesn't matter what your title is. The truth is that leadership is about interactions and collective action through networks, which then creates new ways of being, new ways of creating, new ways of innovating. So what are some of the leadership skills, given the virtuality of our environment, that we want to highlight? This comes from Jarvan Pan, comes from some of my own research, which speaks to the pyramid of skills. And I just want to point out that at both the base of the pyramid, which Jarvan Pa calls benevolence, the base of the pyramid, the thing that holds the pyramid up, are what we call soft skills: empathy, cultural sensitivity, collegiality, proactive collaboration, emotional intelligence. And at the zenith, at the top of the pyramid, once again, are our inherent characteristics: integrity, work ethic, fairness in dealing with others, work values, commitment. And skill sets, hard skill sets, are in the middle: ability, the task, the structure, goals, objectives, and so on. So what we can see here is, in this new environment, the character matters. The character matters, the training matters, but the individual's ability to really communicate is what is going to make a leader successful in Industry 4.0. I want to share with you this new typology that was put forward at the World Economic Forum in 2019. And it is backed up by an excellent paper by Deloitte, the accounting firm, which speaks to the leadership types that will be successful in Industry 4.0. And I'll just share them as you see them here. The first type is called a social super. And what is a social super? In Industry 4.0, industry, environment, and community are integrally linked. And those industries that do well by doing good and recognize their impact on their environment and on society. These are called the sustainability leaders, leaders who understand that everything that they do in their firm impacts the society. So what we are seeing is that the society, industry are no longer separated. There is now an impermeability between the two things. And this is extraordinarily important. So we know that social supers, leaders who really focus on their society, including their employees, are leaders who will have success. And the research in the paper actually shows the bottom line impact of this kind of social responsibility and the care for people, planet, and indeed profit. The second leadership type are data-driven decisives. In the era of big data, there is no excuse for a leader to not use data in terms of decision making. Decision making is the most important element of a leader's role. And data-driven decisives, again, people who make decisions as leaders in their organizations based on the data that they collect, are seeing increased profitability, increased success if they're not a for-profit company. So they have to be methodical and data-focused in their decision-making. The third leadership type are disruption drivers. And we know the term disruption. So these are persons who must not just embrace disruptive innovation, but must also create disruptive innovation in order to move ahead of the competition. But one element of disruption drivers that we must take very close note of is that they involve wide consultation with stakeholders. So stakeholder involvement is very important in terms of leading disruption. And finally, the fourth type is talent champions. Now, in the introduction, we spoke about how HR and organizations are impacted by 4.0. And organizations like to leave talent management to the HR department. But in Industry 4.0, every leader is a talent champion. Every leader has to ensure that they are developing their staff, that they are training, that they are looking for talent outside and within the organization. And that is the key role for success. And once again, the Deloitte paper shows how the talent championship leads to improved success and profitability. So as I move to the last part of my presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about a personal story of mine. And looking at the virtual environment. My role as principal and pro-vice chancellor of the UWI Open Campus has been overseeing 17 different countries in the Caribbean that are about 5,000 miles apart. It means that no matter where I am in discussion with people all over the Caribbean, but also all over the world. And so for me, going into that environment at the time, almost 6 years ago, was sort of like a Star Wars moment. You know, for anyone who is a Star Wars fan, you'll see my little avatar here with my lightsaber. But what did that mean? because this is an Industry 4.0 environment that I am currently working in. And clearly, the first thing that you realize is that your leadership does not have to have a position title. It doesn't matter what your title is. Yes, people will respect your title, but if they're not right in front of you, then they are quite at will to do whatever they want to do. So you have to work not just on titular power, but also on ensuring that you are omnipresent in some ways through the technology, through constant communication, through your own virtual persona that you create. You also, as we said earlier, as a super social, you also have to have what I call superhuman qualities. Not superhuman qualities like, Supergirl or Wonder Woman, but superhuman qualities. Your humanity, your compassion, your empathy is very important in reaching out to people when you are in this kind of environment. And of course, you have to be very adaptive to different environments. The advantages of being an Industry 4.0 leader, you can have a wide sphere of influence. In any one day, I can be speaking to universities all over the world, Australia, India, UK, Jamaica, Trinidad. So you reach beyond the physical boundaries due to the technology, and that allows for the accomplishment of large quantums of tasks. This has to be the most productive era of all the revolutions. But how do you become so productive? Because you collaborate deeply with networks. You lead from behind many times, or I like to say beside your people, and you communicate with empathy. Particularly, I have found that so important in this period of pandemic, where the most important thing for us in the University of the West Indies has been ensuring the health and safety and well-being of our staff and students, everyone being afraid and not knowing what this, these uncharted waters will bring for our organization. But we also have to be mindful that the Industry 4.0 leader has challenges. And one of those challenges can be unrealistic expectations from others. Because you are ever present, because you are omnipresent, because you seem to be involved, consecutively, concurrently, actually, in 50 different things, people can have unrealistic expectations from you. And so those are personal demands on your time, energy, and your health. And that is why health and wellness are so important in this 4.0 environment. I myself have recently taken up quite a bit of meditation and even Tai Chi in order to focus better and to manage the energy and health demands, because otherwise you lead to quick burnout as an Industry 4.0 leader. And finally, this one, know when to step aside, but not step away from leadership in your organization. And this is particularly because of the multi-generational nature of our environment. Young leaders have great ideas, and it is tempting for our older leaders to try to be a little bit condescending and say, your time will come. But as an older leader, it is wise to allow your younger leaders to come forward, but not leave them to struggle, to step aside, to step to their side and to help them. And this is why I have come up with this concept of the hybrid leader for Industry 4.0. And this includes, therefore, some of the other skills that may have come over from Industry 3.0, adaptability and flexibility. Secondly, very important, the leader never stops learning. The leader must also continue to upgrade their skills. There is need for energy and enthusiasm, for vision, communication, and collaboration. And remember that in 4.0, you are not necessarily the one out front, although sometimes, as my little icon there shows, you do need to pick up your lightsaber and go out there and fight some battles for your people. But for the most part, internally in the organization, the Industry 4.0 leader is more a coach, a mentor, a facilitator. And my final thing is remember that you are chosen to be a leader. You do not choose yourself to be a leader. Sometimes leaders forget, and particularly in this environment, that you're only a leader if people choose to follow you. Otherwise, as John Maxwell says, you're just taking a walk in the park. So remember that your leadership is really dependent on how much you get the people that you are trying to lead to whatever objective to buy into the vision. And without that, you are not a leader. So that means the 4.0 leader has to have a good dose of humility in terms of his or her place in the organization. So I end by saying leadership is all about influence. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It has always been that way, but in Industry 4.0, influence is even more important than in the previous areas of the industrial revolutions 1 to 3. But one of the challenges, and I picked this quotation up from a textile firm in Bangladesh writing about leadership in 4.0. And what they said is that the truth is that the significant challenge for Industry 4.0 is not only about technology. We tend to think it's all about technology, but it is also a lack of digital culture and skills in the organization. And more so now, we need to develop leadership 4.0 in organizations. So it isn't an easy task, and it is as hard as going out, to worlds that we've never explored before. But with training, with focus, leaders can manage and succeed in the challenging environment of Industry 4.0. So I end with my Star Wars theme by saying, may the force be with you, and may you understand that.
Thank you, Dr. Longswood. Wonderful, wonderful presentation about how to lead in a future that most of us in the Caribbean are now getting exposed to, but how to effectively lead in that industry 4.0. So before we get into the questions from the chat room, I would like to ask any of our forum members, our council members, if there's any questions that you may like to ask at this time. So perhaps Dr. SP
So,
Singh,
Riaz,
Rohit, etc.
Riaz,
Yes.
I'll take the opportunity. There is Mr. Ikshan Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh, hello,
Yes,
Mr. Ghosh, can you
yes.
hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. I
All
can.
right, so you can put your question, whatever you have wrote in the chat box, please.
Yeah. So thank you, madam. You have very clearly described the industry 4.0 leaders. I mean, attributes of the leaders. But nowadays, majority, what we see that majority are trying to be a boss or manager. So and we found the actual leaders are very few in the industry. So any industry. So where leaders are different from the manager and boss, where the actual leaders. If you can just elaborate or just can say in brief.
Yes, well, that, Mr. Ghosh, that is the typical question that most people have in organizations. What's the difference between the leader and the manager? And the truth is that we need them both, because a leader can also be a manager, but generally a manager can not necessarily be a leader. The issue is what I indicated early in the presentation, Mr. Ghosh. The fact is that our training systems, our educational system, and I'm an educator, so I'm sort of implicating myself as well. We have not trained our people for leadership. We have trained them to manage portfolios, to manage functions. We have not really imbued them with leadership skills. So then when they go into the organization, an organization that needs leadership, we are faced with persons who really are afraid, one, because they have not been empowered. Two, they don't have the skill set to actually lead. And so they are still going back to the old way of leading, either being a boss, which is directive, autocratic, and that belongs to Industry 1.0, because that's what they know. So, you know, this is why Whiteboard Labs and the UWI and Arnie University, we are so passionate about the importance of training our people for this environment, because the tradition has not been to train. It has been, okay, I'm an HR manager, I'm a finance manager, I'm an accountant, but their leadership role has not been highlighted in their training. That's one. The second thing is that the leaders within the organizations have to recognize, as I said, that their job is to create leaders.
True.
So sometimes we as leaders, we are also culpable by not empowering the persons in our organizations that we see have the potential to lead. So I would say two things: train the managers to be leaders, and train the leaders to be leaders.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, madam. Maybe in the future, I will also wanted to be trained on the leadership skills of yours. I mean, it's you have narrated it very correctly and on a very good way. So thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask Dr. SP Singh if he has any question.
Dr. Longsworth, I would like to put two questions before you. One is that as you talked about the multi-generations coexisting simultaneously within an organization, and the rate of pace which the rate of change is so high that all generations have to simultaneously coexist. How would you, from your own experience and practice, how do you account for the conflicts that engender, and what would be the best way that you would suggest? I would also like to put the second question so that you could formulate a common response to them. In 90s, we used to hear of Robert Greenleaf's servant leadership. That was a concept which was very popular with Industry 3.0. Now we have moved to an era where we believe that leaders need to be compassionate, they need to be collaborative, they need to be flexible. How do you relate these two concepts?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Singh. The multi-generational conflict is very real, and in my own organization and in organizations that I've worked in, it becomes a source of great anxiety, particularly for the earlier generations. Even the millennials are having problems with the generation Y and Z that are coming into the workforce. And as a coach, what I have done in my interactions with these persons is to ensure that they can find common ground. The major issue usually is a misunderstanding of how their younger generations are productive. So what we find is the baby boomers and the Generation Xers are used to a certain methodology of work in order to be productive. The generations from, let's say, the 1990s onwards, they are very productive, but they don't have the usual approaches. I mean, they are not going to come to work happily at 6 a.m. in the morning. They want to be able to work, you know, whenever and wherever, but when they do work, they're very, very, very productive. So it's all a mindset change. And that is why the older leader, when I said the older leader, and I include myself, the older leader has to step aside. And when I mean aside, it doesn't mean to just leave the new generational leader on her own, but rather to allow them to move forward with their ideas while you coach, while you mentor. A lot of organizations now are coaching both the older leader and the new leader. in order to show that they can have common ground, that they're able to understand how productive they are. And in Industry 4.0, the issue is not being, clocking in and clocking out. The issue is, are we going to innovate? Are we going to be the first to market with this particular product? Are we going to be able to respond to the customization requirements of our marketplace? And the two ways of doing things can coexist and can work well. But it does require from within the organization a recognition of these differences and how to reconcile the differences. But to honor the knowledge of the older leader and to also honor the innovation and the knowledge of the younger leader of the new markets. So again, I keep coming down to training, but in this particular case, Professor, I would say that coaching, mentoring, creating mentorship relationships between your older generational leaders and your newer leaders, because the research has shown that the younger generation of leaders really want to be mentored. They really want to be coached, but they don't necessarily want you to tell them, well, this is how it was done in my day. They don't want that, that's for sure. So, the older leader has to recognize that they have to really become a mentor. In Eastern tradition, for instance, that is what happens, with the elders. And even in African tradition, the elders are there to pass on their wisdom to the newer generation, but not necessarily to tell them how it must be done, but giving them the wisdom of their experience. So that's the first question. Servant leadership. In fact, what we're seeing, and I mentioned that, Professor, that some of the characteristics of the leader of Industry 3.0 are still very valid for Industry 4.0, because 3.0 was the digital revolution, the virtual revolution, and we are still in a virtual arena. And so, yes, especially at times like these with pandemics and various other, issues that affect how organizations work, the servant leader is literally enabling the organization through compassion, through empathy, finding out what they need in order to be very productive. And it ties in with the typology that we saw coming out of World Economic Forum that speaks to the social super, the fact that the leader is at the service of his community, his environment, and his or her employees. So there is a definite carryover of servant leadership. Servant leadership in its initial configuration referred a lot to organizations like religious organizations, schools, and so on, but that has now moved into the wider Industry 4.0, given the new environments that we have to work in. So I hope I have answered your two questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Longswood. So I would like to recognize Professor Harold McDougall. He is in the chat, so welcome, Professor McDougall. Do you have any questions you would like to pose to Dr. Longswood at this time? Okay, so while Professor...
here I am. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you. As I continue to repeat, I'm not a digital native. So some of the digital skills for the older leaders that Dr. Longsworth mentioned are things that I am in the process of learning. So I had to fumble around on my tablet a bit before I could find the unmute. I just wanted to congratulate Dr. Longsworth on her presentation. It's not only, it's her style. Not only is it intelligent and informative, it's also warm and passionate, and kind of you bringing people into your sphere. So may the force be with you as well. My kind of input into this whole process is more in the realm of something called social ecology, which has to do with the balance between enterprise, society, the civic sector, political sector, and the environment. Dr. Longsworth, if you have any thoughts on how Industry 4.0 leaders need to be mindful of their impact on the non-human environment in which we all operate. Obviously, climate change is a problem. Pandemic is something that we now recognize is a feature of how closely we live together and how closely we interact with our protein sources. Just some of the kinds of things that industrial leaders need to think about in this new world. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Harold, and thanks for the kind comments. Good to see you. Indeed, this is a priority. If you recall the slide that I pointed out about the four typologies, the first one, the very first, and what is noted as the most important is the leader as social super. And, you know, I really commend that article because it goes into those details, Harold, where it speaks about the impact, the social and environmental impact of the organization on the communities, the environment, and so on. And that has to be priority for every industry, that it has to not just look at profit at the expense of the environment, at the expense of people's well-being. It has to look at all of these elements, and leaders have to be that way. So we saw a turn in the road at the time of, let's say, the Exxon oil spill and others like that, where the industry's impact on the environment was highlighted. And now in Industry 4.0, now in 2020, any organization that does that has a negative impact on climate change because of how they dispose of their waste or their production techniques, those are boycotted. Industries or organizations that, for instance, we see what has happened with the Black Lives Matters movement in the US. Organizations that are not hiring diversely, those organizations are being boycotted. So what Deloitte's research showed is that those organizations that really mindfully and intentionally affect the environment, both the human and the natural environment in positive ways, are organizations that have higher profit levels. And the issue has always been, you know, who am I owing my loyalty to? The shareholders, it used to be, but now it's not shareholders, it's the stakeholders, it's everyone. All of my customers, my clients, if I am using environmentally unfriendly materials, people will not buy from me. So I think that we are there, but of course there are still leaders who don't get it. And they, I think, will exit the market very quickly, Harold. But I know you do quite a lot of work in this area, so thanks for the question. But indeed, I like the typology of the social super as the key leader in the Industry 4.0 environment.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Longswood. We have a number of questions coming in from the Caribbean Facebook, as well as there's a number of questions in the chat. So we'll try to get as much in as possible. So I would like to ask Shivya Dixit to ask a question. So Shivya, if you could open your mic and ask your question, please.
Yes, sure. Hello, ma'am. Ma'am,
Hello,
as you answered for the first question, that those having the skill set will be the leaders, and those who don't have will be the boss. And in this pandemic, people are facing so much of insecurity, and everyone is not able to adopt change so quickly. So the leaders, today's leaders who have the power to judge, who have the power to eliminate the people, they will go for the being boss. They will stop their stewardship, their citizenship behavior. They will like, if there is a situation where organization have to do a cost cutting, they will hide their information, and they can eliminate three more in my five, and they will hide information because they want two of their favorites will be there. So what do you think that organization, how can they maintain this?
Right, right. I think I'm going to just try and say back what I think you're asking. You're saying that in this particular environment of the pandemic, that leaders are faced with issues such as what to do within the organization to cut costs, to maintain profit, and so on. Yes,
Yes,
and
yes.
and
They are losing their behavior of citizenship, their stewardship. They are again being boss.
they're moving back to being the boss rather than
Yes,
than the leader, because they're focusing only on the bottom line. And
yes,
Shivya, I think that that is inevitable, because as I had said earlier, we have leaders in organizations who have not evolved into leaders of Industry 4.0, in that they are still using old models to deal with new issues. So the approach of the 1990s, 80s, and so on, when we had any kind of economic crisis, was always to cut the staff. Now, as someone who has gone through that period, what we learned is that that is a very short-sighted approach, because then you have to build back the skill sets. And so you really want to hold on to your excellent people, so that when you are able to build back, you can have the skills that you need in the organization. So I have no answer for you. I just have to say that we have unenlightened leaders who are posing as leaders, but are really managers. We do know that they have to take hard decisions. And yes, sometimes they may have to reorganize and restructure. But the key thing is, how do you do it in a humane way? And we've seen some good examples. So for instance, we've seen examples of people not just cutting all their staff, but maybe doing things like, job sharing, in order to ensure that everybody has something of a salary. I think more of that is happening across the world than used to happen. But it is a process, and many leaders will not learn until it affects their bottom line. And that is the truth. Until they see that by cutting, a Los Longsworth or a Reyes Valdeo, they have lost, tremendous talent that they won't be able to get back. Until they see that, then they won't really understand how it affects their own bottom line. And I keep going back to just enlightening them, to training them, to opening their eyes to how important it is to lead differently in this environment. But this is why we're having these talks, because we want people to understand that this is a different environment. It's not what it used to be. You can't use the same approach in order to be successful.
Okay, thank you for that response, Dr. Longswood. I would like to raise two questions from our Caribbean people. One would be, how does a younger leader approach a more mature and experienced team member as it relates to correction and training in Industry 4.0 context, as well as what do you think the Caribbean needs to do to avoid being left behind by the 4.0 train?
Okay. The first one, I'm very comfortable with. How do you approach a more senior leader in terms of correction and training? I think you really just have to engage them on their own level. As you heard, I'm a John Maxwell coach. One of the things that John Maxwell teaches us is that you have to develop a relationship before you can get something out of an exchange. So if you've never spoken to me as your principal, if you've never come to any of my meetings, and then one day you come to me and you say, well, Dr. Longsworth, I really didn't like what you said about this and that, then the reaction is going to be different to whether we have had a relationship. So the key thing is really to develop a relationship with your leader that is neutral of the work. Even just a cordial relationship of good morning and how are you, how is your family. Believe it or not, those things make a difference. And then it creates an entree where you can actually just set a time, just say, and flattery works, just say, Dr. Longsworth, I really appreciate how much you have indicated that coaching and mentoring is important. Could we sit down sometime and have a discussion about coaching me, because I'd like to learn from you. It helps, and that will help to develop the relationship where you can lay out what you would like that senior leader to do. And I would say the vast majority of senior leaders want to be able to support and to see you move up. So I would attack it that way, by creating a relationship with the person that you want to mentor you, to train you, and then to move to the next level of asking for their help in doing that. As a teacher, I would say those are my favorite students, the ones who come and say, well, what did I do wrong on the essay? Could you show me, and to really take it from a humble way, instead of saying, how come I only got a C when I should have gotten an A? So that's the difference there. That's the way I would suggest. And in terms of the Caribbean, yes, I think that we are not where we should be. I think that the university, all the universities, all of the training institutions have to now rapidly ramp it up. The good thing is that we're quick learners in the Caribbean. And I don't see us necessarily falling behind once we recognize that this is a different environment. And yes, we are not where we should be with the technologies, but as you've seen from the presentations, the 4.0 is less about the technologies and more about the mindset of the people who are implementing the technology. So my own focus is, let's change the mindset of the people and open them up to what Industry 4.0 can do in the development of the Caribbean.
Thank you for those responses, Dr. Longsworth. Before we move on to Krutika, who has two questions, and one of those questions is actually really important to me. I would like to recognize Miss Karen Roseman, who's our country manager for Trinidad and Tobago. So, hi, Miss Roseman. Okay, so Krutika, if you can unmute your mic and ask both your questions, please.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good
My
evening.
question is, as an introvert, how to become a successful leader in this current rigorous era? And also one more question is, what are the skills you need to inculcate as a beginner to become a successful entrepreneur?
Okay, so those are two different things. How to become a successful leader in this environment. What does a leader do? A leader influences other persons. So what you have to do in the organization is to find how to influence persons that are within your group. And remember that it's not only about influencing the people below you, but it's also about influencing the people who work at your level and also the people who are above you. Because if you have a good idea, you need the support of your leader, and you need the support of your peers, and you can get the support of the people who you lead through your interaction with them. So the important thing, Kritika, is that you ensure that you are able to influence people. I think our mindset about leadership is often, how am I going to get someone to do this? I'm going to tell them, because I am the supervisor, I'm the head. I'm going to tell them, do this, and they have to do it, or else I'm going to write you up, I'm going to, fire you. That is coercion, that's not leadership. So for young leaders, it's very important that you realize that you can influence people. You have to start the relationships with people, because people really don't care until they know that you care. And that's important. Once your people that you work with know that you care about them and not just about your own aggrandizement as a leader, then you will find that you will get their support. And they will work with you. And I have proven that personally over and over again. In terms of successful entrepreneurship, those require even leadership skills, but also skills of decision making. So if we go back to our 4 typologies, you use the data. The beauty of Industry 4.0 is that the data is available to all of us now. So the leader is no longer only the holder of information. And I go back to, I think it was Chevia's question, where the boss is holding back information. But you can get that data. That data is available, even in just good old Google. So use data to take your risk, because an entrepreneur is a risk taker. But you have to be a measured risk taker by looking at the data in particular. And then, of course, your leadership skills would be to influence and to get other people to see the vision that you have for the product or service that you are innovating. So the key thing for me would be to become a data-driven decision maker as an entrepreneur. That's very important in this world now. In the past, entrepreneurs had a grand idea, and and you could just go out there and the norm is saying, you will fail 15 times. We don't have the luxury of that anymore. So you want to reduce the number of failures that you would have by looking at the data that is available for your industry.
Hey, thank you for that response, Dr. Longswood. We just have a few more questions. So I would ask Shistri to ask her question. Shistri?
Hello.
Shistri, you're
Not
having some
hearing.
connectivity issues. So I'll pose a question for her.
Hello.
So Shistri asks, what is servant leadership?
Okay. Servant leadership is exactly what it sounds like. It is leadership that does not think of self. It's leadership that that puts your skills as a leader, all of what you have as a leader at the service of the organization. So it is the leading from behind concept. It is the leader who looks not for what he or she will get out of the interaction with the employee, but how he or she can help the employee, help the organization to move forward, to maximize their goals and their aspirations. So in the typology, which came out in the late 90s, we looked at the large religious leaders as servant leaders. So you can look at Buddha, you can look at Jesus, those persons who really put themselves to the transformation of others, and they put that first and not themselves. So it's a sort of sacrificial leadership. So there may be, for instance, an example where if you look at Jesus, where in order to liberate, in order to remove sin, Jesus allowed himself to be sacrificed for the growth of the organization. And if you look at how the Christianity has grown, then you can see that his leadership led to a successful organization developing. So I hope that explains it.
Sorry. So thank you for that, Dr. Longso. We have one more question from the Caribbean side. Effective leaders continually need to listen, reflect, and learn. But they can't do all of those questions without asking the right questions first. In your opinion, what are the best questions you ask yourself or your team?
That's a nice one. Yes, good leaders ask great questions. The best question you can ask yourself, first of all, is why do I want to do this? Why do I want to be a leader? And if the answer starts I, then you're in the wrong field, right? Because it's never about you. And many people think that being a leader is the top of the mountain. And I would say, no, being a leader is a very self-sacrificial thing. So you must always ask yourself, why am I doing this? And the minute that that answer is all about you, then you need to change your focus. So that's the first question I ask myself. What do I ask others when, as you rightly say, you have to listen? It's the same thing. Why? What is the core purpose of what you are proposing, what you're suggesting, what you are doing? What is it that you are ultimately trying to get at? Because many times we jump the gun, we don't listen, we are already planning our response as the person speaks. And sometimes the person isn't able to articulate themselves clearly. So you must ask the usual questions, why, what, how? And literally listen to the individual response and then have a discussion. So those are very simple things. Why? Why? And there's a great book that calls Getting to Why. And that is the key question. Why? And drill down. And if you still don't get the right answer, or the answer that sounds, authentic, keep asking why. Why? Why is it that you want to introduce this product? Why? Why? Until you get to the core reason.
Okay, thank you for that. And we have one more question. This will be our final question before we hand over to Whiteboard Labs. One question from Shobha Bansal. So Shobha, can you unmute your mic and pose your question, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Shobha.
So my question is, with so many aspects of Industry 4.0, how important will be communication is? Or will we just machine dependent?
How important is communication, or should it be machine dependent?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Communication is number one, Shobha, in this environment. It is the one thing that human beings will never lose. Even with artificial intelligence, it is always going to be humans who program the artificial intelligence anyway. But communication is more than just getting information out. It is creating a connection with the people. So while machine intelligence, artificial intelligence can answer questions, and there is a place for that, what that should do is to free time up for leaders to communicate and connect. So instead of dealing with routine questions like how much is the product cost, where can I get it, you can program that into a machine. But when someone comes and says, well, my family is has an income of X, and we're having a difficulty with this particular product, and we would like, that is going to require communication, connection. It's going to require empathy. It's going to require compassion for the leader to reach out to that particular person. So I can give you an example. In my own organization, we have a help desk, and when the student has a problem, they put their thing in, and they go through the process and they get an automated response. But then there are times when they reach out to me and they say, Dr. Longsworth, I'm a teacher. I have a difficulty with paying the fees this month, and my father is ill and my fees have gone. You can't tell that to a machine. A machine cannot respond to that. I mean, maybe we'll get better, but still the decision has to be taken by someone who then responds with empathy. And inevitably, those students pay their fees if you give them a break. But if you program a machine to say, well, if they say this, you say no. If they say that, you say yes. So communication, let's call it connection rather than communication, can only be done in 4.0 with the individual. And that is more important now that we have so much machine-man interface.
Thank you.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Longsworth. We're a bit over time and there's a lot of questions coming in. So what I would advise persons is if you can leave a contact information and we can follow up with your questions. So I'd like to thank everyone for submitting their questions. I would like to hand over to Mr. Ashish um, Kumar from Whiteboard Labs to make a statement. So Ashish.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so very much. And good morning to all, and good evening from India. And thank you so very much, Dr. Longsor. That was really a wonderful presentation, bringing out points about leadership in 4.0, and which gave us a whole new perspective. This is just a short announcement about our Center of Excellence. All subjects or competencies we talk about are offered through the Center of Excellence in a learn, apply, and practice model, including projects and internship. And this Center of Excellence will applicable both in India as well as Caribbean region. And these trainings are virtual with self-learning modules, workshops and mentors, and an internship or a project or every student. If you would like more information, do leave a message or email us. We are also welcoming industry mentor through our volunteering programs. And this COE has launched a blog, and every article we published will be informed very soon. Simultaneously, this Center of Excellence is formed for trainings, business, consulting for SMEs and social entrepreneurship incubation. So I'll request Riaz to hand over Dr. S.P. Singh Saab, who can give the vote of thanks and conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. So at this time, I would like to call on Dr. S.P. Singh to give final conclusion and vote of thanks. Dr. S.P. Singh.
It has been indeed a very enriching, very meaningful, very insightful evening. And for this, I would like to thank Dr. Longsworth, who really not only told us, started from the very basics. She talked about what Industry 4.0 is about and how should an organization, what would be the shape or characteristics of organization as we eventually move towards Industry 4.0. So some key takeaways I would just mention as a recapitulation of this very insightful session. She talked that it has to be multi-generational and diverse. Therefore, a leader, in order to navigate through this organization, needs to have high levels of empathy and should be able to bridge gaps, should be able to connect to stakeholders, and be able to forge a common vision. She talked also about the importance of soft skills, and I really like that expression when she said that the soft skills of yesterday are going to be the new hard skills. They would be required more and more in the modern workforce. And therefore, there has to be in any learning curriculum, there has to be a greater emphasis on the acquisition of soft skills. Then she talked about that we have to move away from the model of competition and lay emphasis on innovation and collaboration. And this requires a very significant uh, transformation in the very mindsets, the mindsets that have been oriented and honed in the paradigms of competition. To think of others as collaborators and to innovate along with in order to create value. She talked that we need to be the organizations would largely move away from physical to virtual. They'll be mobile, they'll be agile, they'll call for flexibility of response, for higher degree of resilience, for the continual changes that would be presented before them. And of course, she did talk about that we'll need to focus more on health, wellness, and well-being, because she said that the new Industry 4.0 is going to pose almost unrealistic expectations on the leaders, and therefore they would do well if they take care of their health and maintain their energy levels. She said that leadership in today's time would be a very complex phenomena that would continue to emerge and which would be interactive in nature, and it would be a very dynamic and complex interplay of various forces that would be shaping, factoring, leading to the evolution of the environment. She talked of certain important characteristics that probably the different kinds of leaders that would be required: social supers, data-driven decisives, those who would have ability to crunch data and factor it into decision, disruption drivers, who on one hand disrupt the processes, yet on other hand, as she insisted, are also able to take all stakeholders into confidence so that this disruption does not lead into uncontrollable entropy, but it is a creative, positive, controlled disruption towards the achievement of goals. And she talked about talent champions. She said that if not held wisely, it can lead to a quick burnout. And of course, we need to step out in order to give opportunity, leadership role to the younger generation. Yet at the same time, we need to step away, but we need to make a very fine balance between stepping out and stepping away. Though it has to be somewhere in between, the balance has to be struck. And of course, some of the characteristics she talked of for people, for our young participants who'd really like to thrive in this environment, I would just list some important takeaways from them. She said that we need to be adaptable and flexible. A leader needs to be a lifelong learner, committed to the skill development. One needs to be energetic and enthusiastic, should be a visionary with the ability to communicate that vision, to win people over with that vision, should have a collaborative mindset, should be a coach, a mentor, and a facilitator. And thereby, this idea of servant leadership in subsequent question and answer session needs to be further extended, where a leader emerges as a coach and mentor. And above all, a leader needs to remember that leadership is valid as long as people choose him, endow him with that trust and responsibility. And therefore, it's the role of the leader to safeguard it. I'm sure, Dr. Longsworth, it has been a very sumptuous treat. And even if we take a few takeaways from this banquet that you so lavishly spread before us, it is going to enrich us, and it is going to enrich our lives, our leadership, and effectivity in the position and situations wherever we are. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge Mr. Rich Baldeo, Coordinator of Business Development, University of West Indies, who so ably coordinated it, the whole program. I would also like to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Rohit Shipperston, founder of Whiteboard Labs, who has been constantly driving and who brought everyone together on this platform and has made these collaborations and these learning experiences possible. I also would like to extend my thanks to Mr. Ashish Kumar, the Vice President of Collapso, and various other people from Team Whiteboard, from the University of West Indies. I would like to acknowledge Professor McDougall, Dr. Ashish Trahan, and various other people who have been working behind the scenes for the success of this program. I would also like to thank each one of the participants, those who watch here on this platform, and those who kind of logged into the live streaming of the program. So thanks everyone for participating and making this evening a very significant and meaningful one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so again, thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you in the next web jam. So look out to our social media channels and you will be informed. So thank you very much again. Have a good evening or a good day. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.